While I make every effort to broadcast correct information, I'm also still learning. I will double check all my facts, but realize that healthcare is a constantly changing science and art. One doctor or healthcare provider may have a different way of doing things from another. I welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. I take no money from supplement or device companies. By listening to this podcast or reading this blog, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice or to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Consult your healthcare provider for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or the website. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Boss Body podcast be responsible for damages arising from use of the podcast or the blog. This blog or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing the standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or the blog. What's up, guys? It's Dr. Tim Jackson with another episode of the Boss Body Podcast. Fasting, intermittent fasting, dry fast, water fast. Fasting is all the rage these days and has a lot of science behind it. So I brought in an expert in incremental fasting, Mr. Kyle Newell. Welcome to the show, Kyle.
What's up, Tim? Thanks for having me, buddy.
Absolutely. So tell me about the concept and the creation of the Panda Diet.
Sure. So I came on to fasting back in 2014. I was getting ready. That was the last time I competed in bodybuilding. I was coming back off a horrific knee injury, and I was about 8 weeks out from the show, reading some of Lyle McDonald's work, who I was a big fan of. And I'd heard of fasting up until that point, but I was believed like a lot of people, oh, I'm going to lose muscle, all this nonsense. But for some reason, about 8 weeks out, I'm reading about how it attacks stubborn fat, increases blood flow, the first step in fat loss to the alpha receptors. And I said, you know what? Let me do this. So I went from, at that point, I would have to eat literally 15, 16, 1,400 calories a day to get ripped. I had done it wrong. I've been coached wrong. But I took those 4 meals, let's say 1,600 calories, split it to your traditional intermittent fasting, 16-hour fast, 2 meals. And right away, I noticed this is much easier. And I stayed with that. Sometimes I do a 20-hour fast, but I did that for about 5 years. And in 2019, I was doing a fat loss contest with my staff. We have 2 gyms here. And I said, let me dive back into the research on this and start trying with longer fasting. So 2019, I started doing 48s. Actually, that whole first summer, I did a 72-hour fast every week. Got all the data, saw what it did to my body, and then kind of wrote the book that following year right in the midst of COVID, and it was off to the races. And now that's what I teach, a big part of what I teach people.
And tell us why the name Panda.
So it's interesting. So if you look, there's a panda tattoo right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So are you familiar with Ron Artest? Do you remember him?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I love the old, that's how I used to play basketball, very physical. I like the old school. And he was kind of a throwback to the old school. So I was a fan of his. And I think it was like 2013, 14. I was on his email list, and he changed his name temporarily to like the Panda's Friend, something like that, or the Friendly Panda. And I bought a hat and a shirt, and I wanted to support him. So then I started looking into the panda, the animal. And I was like, this is an interesting animal, man. They thought it was Westerners thought it was a mythological creature. They didn't really discover it in the wild till about 150 years ago. But then if I looked at the symbolism behind it, black or white, also people think it's like this cuddly creature, but it's also fierce. That's why I say, I kind of connect with that, man. I'm very kind to people, but I'm also a competitor at heart. So when the time came to write the book, I was like, what am I going to call it? So I'll call it the Panda Diet. So there's nothing to do with what a panda eats. And then based off of that, we had created, my online brand with the Panda Man and all that type of stuff, and made our own logo. And it's kind of just taken off from there. But it's not to do with the panda's diet.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm glad you cleared that up, because I was trying to
reasoned through it before we got on and started recording, and I was like, maybe I don't know enough about pandas. So fasting, let's talk about catabolism. And so for the listeners, viewers, your body can basically be in one of three states. An anabolic state has nothing to do with anabolic steroids, although they can put you in an anabolic state. But sleep is anabolic, insulin is anabolic. You can also be in a state of homeostasis or balance. That's what we're striving for. Or you can be in a catabolic state. So one of the myths, the bro science myths out there is that fasting will put you in a catabolic state. Tell us why that's not true.
Well, it is a big myth, right? And I get this all the time from people. So insulin, as you mentioned, right? Insulin is the most anabolic hormone in the body. So when we optimize the internal environment of the body, it actually gets much easier to lose body fat and put on muscle, the more insulin sensitive we get. So I'll start there, right? The more insulin sensitive we are, what I call calorie partitioning, nutrient partitioning, much more likely when we train taking nutrients for it to go to the muscle cell than the fat cell. So we're optimizing that. Now we get into the longer fasting, growth hormone spikes dramatically, become more insulin sensitive, luteinizing hormone goes up. So all these things that'll make us more anabolic and preserve muscle mass. And if we look at how the body evolved, right? You weren't eating 3 square meals a day. You had to go out, you had to hunt, you had to gather, you had to fight. So the very things that would enable us to do that, our minds and our muscles, were going to be catabolic and kind of break down if we went a couple days without food. We wouldn't be here. So these things have a built-in mechanism to preserve this stuff. And I know even when I was competing back in the early days as a natural athlete at that time, no testosterone, doing these starvation diets, right? So eating, like I said, 13, 14, 1,500 calories, that if I trained hard enough, I wouldn't lose muscle, right? It didn't make sense if you looked at it from a caloric equation. So it's still a big myth that people have that if you don't eat enough, you're going to lose muscle. Once you have the muscle, as long as the training's there, it's not that hard to maintain.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I hear that all the time too. And another question I get quite a bit is, can I supplement with essential amino acids or a combination of essential amino acids and branched chain amino acids, or will that break my fats?
So that's the early guys that I was studying used to say, okay, you could go up to about 120 calories, 80 calories, whatever, stay in the fastest state. Now that may be true, but I go strict with it, right? I go strict, and I find that as far as the recovery, the insulin resistance and inflammation are like twins. So the longer we do this over a long period of time, I'm not talking about doing it for a week. I've had people do it for a month and be like, wow, I still got hip pain. Well, this stuff, if that's the cause of it, could take some time. But when inflammation's down, you're going to recover much quicker. Like I'm 42 now, and I feel better than I did 15 years ago, when I was competing at my peak. And so you could do that stuff. The stuff that I always kind of caution, even when people want to put stuff in their coffee and whatnot, it's not going to affect the weight loss. But are we missing out potentially on things like autophagy, or is it enhancing that? So I just go strict with it. I do salts in my water. But if people need it, they can certainly do it.
Gotcha. Absolutely. So I talk a lot about electrolytes and the power of electrolytes. They're not sexy like hormones or the gut microbiome, but they're essential, and they're called electrolytes because they help our cells and bodies produce electricity.
Yeah.
We're bioelectrical beings. Sodium, I know it's a myth. It's not the sodium that causes hypertension, it's the sodium in the absence of potassium. Do you have people supplement with a balanced blend of electrolytes? I know sodium is the first electrolyte we use during training.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, that's what I got in here. My buddy, who's got a gym out in Chicago, took what we call the juice formula, which is now I use Celtic sea salt, low salt for potassium, and then baking soda. And we call it the juice. And you mix it up and you drink that. But that stuff, I always tell people when they ask about supplements, I'm like, start with sodium. Again, most people don't think of that as a supplement, but I'm like, this is the best thing you could be on is sodium. And we've been told, just like many things, that it's bad for you, like you said, blood pressure, all these things, water retention, and all that nonsense. But that's one of the staples of the Panda Diet. is getting on those electrolytes for sure.
Absolutely. I think people forget we have receptors in our cells, sodium, potassium pumps, and
Yes.
they control a lot of functions in our bodies. And so when those electrolytes get altered, a lot of things can go wrong. And so I'll tell you a quick story. Through 2019, I was drinking 6 12-ounce glasses a day of molecular hydrogen water. And I was working out 4 days a week with weights, and I was walking for an hour every day. And I live in the southeastern United States, and I wasn't replenishing my electrolytes. Long story short, I ended up in the ER with a potassium of 2.2. I couldn't move my extremities. And so, even with that, sometimes people's potassium will be within the normal range, but that's what's in the blood. So we can test, red blood cell potassium, red blood cell sodium, and we got to make sure we're getting it into the cell. So that's my little anecdotal experience on why electrolytes are so important. And the looks that I get when I tell people, drinking too much water without electrolytes may actually worsen the situation because you've decreased the concentration even further.
Yeah. Yeah. It goes right over most people's heads from what they've been
Yeah.
taught.
Right, exactly. And so I think, unlearning is just as important of a skill as learning.
Certainly.
Uh, Absolutely. So with fasting, people who don't have a lot of metabolic flexibility, like your blood glucose starts to drop if they skip a meal, how can they gradually work into fasting?
So what I've done now, I've had about at this point over 1,000 people go through. I'd put people right into it. What I found is, and what I mean by that is we jump right in. Like I just started this round. This is the 19th or 20th Panda Challenge I've run. I jump them right into a 48. I make sure they're drinking their salts first, and then we go one meal a day. Now, what I teach and what I counsel people on is food is a drug, right? And most people don't realize it affects the internal biochemical, hormonal environment of the body. So a lot of times when we get this shakiness or these type of symptoms, the longest I've seen that last with somebody, one of my students, is a day and a half, 2 days. It goes away. So I always equate that to withdrawal from the drug of food. And I tell people, get a glucometer. When you feel like you're getting shaky and you think you got hypoglycemia, take your blood sugar. And the people that do that, it's always within the normal range. So that stuff usually, from what I've seen, clears up pretty quickly. And once, again, those withdrawal symptoms go away, maybe a little headache, they're off to the races. And like I said, I've never seen it last in my experience more than 2 days, right? It's pretty quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And for people who are really trying to pack on muscle, they are really working hard at adding lean muscle. I know the more insulin sensitive you are, the easier it is to add skeletal muscle.
Yes.
But if someone is trying to gain a lot of muscle, a significant amount, and let's say compete in a bodybuilding show, can they still fast and remain anabolic?
Yeah, that's been, if I ever compete again, that's what I would do, right? And so we got the calorie partition, the insulin sensitivity, and then I like to use, like, I'll get a lot of these guys on Instagram, what I call the fake fitness experts will say, well, you can't break your fast with what it is.
Sorry, Kyle, you still there?
We want to take advantage of the anabolic effect of insulin.
Hey, Kyle, sorry.
Yeah.
It froze on me. Can you go back? It says
Yeah.
my internet connection's unstable for some reason.
Yeah, no problem. So a lot of these guys on like Instagram, right, will kind of say, "Oh, you can't break your fast the way you teach. You're going to spike your insulin." I'm like, listen, I call it the slingshot effect. You want to take advantage of the anabolic effect of insulin. This is part of the system. We want to jack that up, be really insulin sensitive, eat a big feast, and if we had to, like, I don't even mess for the most part with people's macronutrients anymore, but animal protein is more anabolic. So we would increase that if we needed to and build their appetite. And I had a guy the other day on one of my videos from a recent seminar, and he's saying, well, you can't do this. You're going to lose muscle if you don't eat enough. And I said, well, by that line of thinking, if you just eat more, you're going to put on muscle. It doesn't, no, it's the training stimulus. So we got to look at the training stimulus. And it's not like, even when John Meadows was coaching me, he wouldn't make these big jumps in my food. When we were tracking macros, it would be like 250 calories, 500. It wasn't like double your food, like that type of thing. Like it was, so a lot of people just, it's almost like you said, they can't think outside the box, and they haven't done it. So I'm now, when I started the Panda Diet, summer 2019, I was 249 pounds, 16% body fat. I wasn't fat or anything, but I didn't feel good. My neck was, my shirts were tight. And so since that time, I got down to 225 basically within a couple, let's say 2 months. I've maintained 225. Body fat is single digits. Muscle mass, when I do the in-body, is higher than it's ever been. I eat 6 meals a week on average. And so I'm living proof. I've lived this, and I've seen it with my students. So these guys that just want to throw these theories out there, I'm like, I understand what you're saying, but test it and see.
Right. Absolutely. And that's what I tell people with any sort of study, whether it's in medicine, just wellness overall, or, biohacking, the N=1 studies, we're taught that, the bigger the sample size in the study, the better the study was. That's simply not true, because if you're the one person it happened to, then it's 100% for you.
That's exactly it.
And so, besides, let's say you're my patient, you come in the door, you tell me, hey, I've been doing X, Y, and Z, and I'm 85% better. What am I going to say? Hey, Kyle, no, I just read a study that said that's not true. So you're going to stop doing it. We want you to go back into pain.
It's crazy.
And I've never read one single study where they say, we got enough science on this now. Oh, more studies are needed. Yeah, because you're getting funded and your salary is paid by the grants from the studies.
That's
And
exactly.
so, I remember we were discussing before we started recording, Charles Poliquin. Someone challenged him one time that I saw in a video, or he may have stated it in an article. Are there any studies? So he walked him out into his facility, and he's like, yeah, I got 20 whatever jerseys there were autographed around his facility. He said, there's your studies.
That's it. It's real world. I call it reality math. I'm like, you can observe and see that, okay, like people always want to go back to the caloric equation. I'm like, that's got a 95 to 99% failure rate. So you guys keep banging that drum, but you look at the reality of it, and it doesn't hold up. But yet you guys want to keep going back to that. And like the Poliquin example is great. It's reality math. What actually works? Show me what works. And that's all I care about,
Yeah, exactly. I say the same thing. Is it safe? Is it do the benefits outweigh the risk? Then let's try it.
Yeah.
If it's dangerous, then that's a different story.
Yes.
But I don't know if this is true. One thing I've heard many times over the years is that sumo wrestlers only eat one meal a
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. I remember. Yeah. Who was it? It was, I have the guy's book when I first read that. He was Shaquille O'Neal's doctor for a while. Carlin Coker, maybe.
Okay.
He would talk about that. And then I read that they do like a soup early on and then a meal later on. But look at the size of those guys, right? So, and they're performance athletes as well, right? So and what I've seen on that note too is I've had ultra endurance athletes go through my program. Now that's extreme, but what I see, because I believe the oxygenation of the blood is better when we're in fasted states, performance for most people actually goes up, right? They don't have as much obstruction in the blood system. And that's been my experience. Like I can, it's so now I start my week with a 48 in a regular week. So I'll eat tonight. I haven't eaten since Sunday night. I've done 4 hard workouts already in that period of time. And my performance is always on point. It's very rare that I can't perform. So it goes against common logic, but I need to eat so I can have energy to go work out. I'm like, you guys don't get it. That's not how it works.
So is it a myth that the enzymes that create fat cells, that they're upregulated when we skip meals?
So here's the thing. You have the typical North American diet, right? Which I think we've all experienced: cut calories, burn calories, right? This simultaneous model of weight loss. Now, metabolic rate goes up or down 40%. I've experienced, most of my students have experienced it coming down. This is what happened to me when I was bodybuilding. To the point, again, I'm a big guy, and I would have to literally go on these starvation diets to get ripped. The guy my size should have been eating 3,000. You know, I had buddies that would compete that were my size that could eat 3,500 calories, get ripped. I'm like, oh, it's not fair. But what will happen when you do a typical diet, when food is still your main frequency, like your energy source, metabolic rate comes down, hunger hormones go up, fat storing enzymes go up. When we fast, from all the research I've done and experience and what I have in the book, metabolic rate, because mitochondrial function could actually go up 5 to 13%. Fat burning enzymes are kicked on, and your main hunger hormone ghrelin goes down. So it's the exact opposite effect. What people tell you is starvation mode, right? Because it's one of the things I counsel people on. Is look, one of the common enemies, you're going to have people that haven't done this tell you that you're going to go into starvation mode. And I explain to them, when we do a typical diet, this is starvation mode, as most people call it. When we fast, this is what happens. And then they experience it and they see. So it's more of a myth. But if you're doing a typical diet, yes. Right. And I used to train myself with train my system the way I was coached. I would put on 30 or 40 pounds after a bodybuilding show within 3 or 4 days, to the point where I almost had to go to the hospital. And a lot of it was fat. It wasn't all fat, but I would turn on all these enzymes because it's crazy protocols I was doing. And I would be so disgusted, man, because I put in all this work and I'd be like, man, I can't maintain it. And I know the first in 2014, when again, that wasn't even that long of a fast, the 16 to 18. But that rest of that summer, I competed late June, early July. I was able to pretty close maintain my shape for the rest of the summer. Just by, and I was like, man, I'm onto something with this. Not that I invented fasting, but I finally was open to the idea of it.
Right. Absolutely. So for people, you mentioned endurance athletes. I had Maria Emmerich, Keto Maria. She's written, I think, 20 books on the ketogenic diet and protein sparing modified fasting. But she was talking about how, she used to be an endurance runner, and she's been ketogenic for I think 20 plus years, and she cured endometriosis and a few other issues. So there's no reason for people to be drinking Gatorade during the middle of a race.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to mention the glucose is going to push out whatever electrolytes you may have otherwise gotten.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of just based in dogma, a lot of this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I can't remember who the scientist was, but he tested or he tasted the original Gatorade formula. And then, right afterwards, he tested a current Gatorade. He said they're nothing alike.
Nothing.
Almost nothing alike.
That
So
was
it's
one of
been commercialized.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. One of the few things I actually learned as far as education wise in the classroom in college. I went to University of Delaware Fitness Management. I remember one of the old time professors telling us, if you're going to drink Gatorade, cut it in half. Pour half in another bottle, fill it up with half water. And he's like, that's the way you should consume it, not this super concentrated, basically sugar drink. I mean, it tastes good.
Right. So along those same lines, we hear people say, "Oh, I got to have carbs after my workout. I got to replenish my glycogen stores. Dr. Tim, my glycogen stores." What are your thoughts on that?
So most people that come to me, the primary reason is fat loss, right? And I explain, listen, for that to happen, we got to have glucagon up and glycogen stores have to be on the lower side. If we always have this ready available source in our muscles and our liver with glycogen, you're not going to necessarily alter or drop body fat. And again, I go back to myself. Once your body, like I see with people that go through my program, like 2 weeks, the body kind of converts over, right? And gluconeogenesis and taps into not the protein in their muscle, but all this extra protein and skin and all that. And the energy sources there. And you're going to have, like what I teach with the feast, you're going to have enough glycogen to perform. Right. But I don't believe like that was something John. So I had a lot of great coaches that coached me. So when Mountain Dog was coaching me, he would really hammer home the peri-workout nutrition, do a little shake before, maybe drink intra workout. And then afterwards we do cream of rice with grass-fed whey protein. And I understand the concept behind it, but I think for majority of the population, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to add too is, in the gut, that's where 70 to 80% of our immune system is.
Yeah.
We have the gut associated lymphatic tissue, and the mucoid associated lymphatic tissue. And when you're constantly eating, you're exposing the immune cells to antigens or potential antigens. And from an evolutionary standpoint, it was very unlikely for us to be able to consume the same food over and over and over, day in and day out. But now I'm definitely guilty of it myself. I find a healthy food I like and I eat it over and over. But let's say I eat a food right now, it takes 4 days for the body to completely metabolize it and excrete,
Or the,
whatever's left of it. So you got the autophagy, the mitochondrial biogenesis, and you also have the immune system
yes,
balancing
yeah.
effect of it.
Oh yeah.
And myostatin, correct me if I'm wrong, is largely from the immune system.
Yeah, that's a great point. I haven't even really, I was big into myostatin studying that probably about 15 years ago because I came across a guy that I believe lacked the gene, and it was fascinating. But that's something I actually have to look into more. I mean, that's something I can incorporate into it. And yeah, a lot of people aren't even familiar with myostatin, but that's really cool too, man. I get
Yeah,
into that.
absolutely. And, the total body stress load. So, Charles Poliquin, he was the first, to my knowledge, well, besides Jack LaLanne, to realize that, okay, yeah, nutrition's important, exercise and training is important, but you also have to work on balancing your physiology, especially in today's world, with all the toxins we're exposed to, the artificial blue lights, the non-native EMFs, the mold, the pathogens, heavy metals, etc. So, in terms of body composition, you know, our body is always trying to keep us alive. It doesn't really know anything about looking good on stage or in a bathing suit. And so, have you had clients who struggle to lose body fat at first, but then when you start with the fasting and the autophagy increases and improves, they're able to lose body
Oh
fat?
yeah, no doubt. And I tell people this, I'm like you said, the body is built for survival, right? So if it's not healthy, we got a lot of insulin resistance, inflammation, all this stuff, and they could do. And I've had a lot of people come to my program or the gyms that have, hey, I've done this diet, I've done this, nothing works, especially a lot of women. As soon as we get them fasting in a prolonged fasting, there's a lady just recently, she was at her wit's end and she came and said, I can't, she's like 60 years old and she's ecstatic. She had to get all new clothes. She's not even a big person, but the body will change when you give it a break, right? You give it a break and reduce the inflammation, right? If it's an inflamed, and I always kind of equate that too for a lot of people that have trouble getting pregnant. I'm like, well, if you're not healthy, why would your body reproduce? It doesn't make sense, right? Now you
Right.
get the oddball that it will slip past and it'll happen. Just like you can get somebody that's not healthy, but these are outliers. For the
Right.
majority of people, get them healthy. And then all of a sudden, what I call with the Panda Diet, I focus a lot on the mindset. When you make the inside out transformation, get the inside of the body healthy, get your mind right, then all of a sudden the body starts taking on the look that
Mhm.
you've always wanted. Well, most people take the outside in. I got to get the scale to look like this. I got to do my macros. I got to cut this, blah, 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 this. And they just, most of the time they wind up frustrated and they never get what they want. That's what I did when I was bodybuilding. But Devin would tell me, it would frustrate the heck out of me. Not when I was actually, she only saw me compete those 2 times. She'd be like, I don't understand how well you eat. You train all the time. I would think, and she didn't say it in a mean way, but she's like, I would just think you would look different, like you would be leaner, and I would get frustrated because I'm like, it doesn't make sense. I'm
Mhm.
eating 2,200 calories a day in the off season. I'm trying to blah blah blah, and I would never have this look. Now I have the look, and it's not even like it's not my primary focus at all. It's
Right.
performance and health, but it was that shift, man, and the body took on the look that I always kind of thought I should look like.
Yeah, I remember I did a scientific program design course from Charles Poliquin and Paul Chek. Virtually, I ordered the DVDs. I remember Paul Chek saying in there, nature only wants to reproduce things that are strong, healthy, and powerful.
Yeah,
And look at what is the fastest growing area or one of the main fastest growing areas in medicine, reproductive medicine.
yeah. It's huge, man. That's great. Check's another one, man. That guy's a genius
Yeah.
too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, think at a body weight of like 165, he was deadlifting 400 something pounds.
Oh, he's insane. I mean, he's and he's an outlaw. Like he's an outlier in terms of how he thinks as far as fit. You get so many people getting fitness and medicine that are just, this is the way it is. And it's like, again, does it work? Like,
Right.
no, you know,
Yeah, and I know he rubbed people the wrong way when he said, if you can't teach this stuff in your underwear, you shouldn't be teaching it.
that's crazy.
And I agree with them. I had a
Yeah.
professor in my doctorate program. She's telling me how basically I was going to go into renal failure from the protein I was eating. Meanwhile, she's stuffing down an order of fries from like Chick-fil-A. I'm like, yeah, no.
You can't take it serious.
Yeah, I mean, you just lost all credibility. I mean, I'm not saying you have to be Superman to teach, but you at least got to make an effort,
You
you
gotta make
know?
an effort. Yeah. You gotta make an effort.
Absolutely. So, in terms of mindset, so I know you focus a lot on the mind and the power of the mind, and I know in your bio you mentioned that. Talk to us about how mindset plays a role in training and how strength training, the Stoics, Aristotle, Plato, all those guys, they train their body, well, for strength, but also for the main purpose of being smart.
Yeah, that's the biggest, people ask me a lot of times about like Mike Menser, who I'm a big fan of, and I think another really just outlier the way he thought. And what do you think of his, minimalist but intense training? Like, I said, it's great, but I don't train for that reason. I train for the mind. And so I want to get these growth factors that can only get to your mind through physical activity.
Mhm.
Right. And that's what I'm after. And that's what I teach my students is that's what you should be after. Because now if you feel better through your training, you're going to make better decisions. Everything is going to be elevated, right? The mind is naturally, it's Velcro for the negative. It's another survival mechanism, always scanning for threats. So one of the big things with the training, feel better, but then with the Panda diet, I tell people, listen, all of a sudden now you have to work on your inner dialogue because hey, you're in a 48-hour fast, or you're doing a 72 or one meal a day, and you want to eat. Now, how are you going to deal with that mentally? You got to work on this. And now you all of a sudden you become more self-aware. Wait a minute. I'm thinking about food, but I don't really need it. I'm just thinking about it. So now I want it. And then this starts to carry over to everything else. And it's the mind map stuff I teach is all about the self-awareness, thinking about your thoughts. What are you telling yourself? And how are you redirecting your focus when you start getting into these negative states, right? Because it happens to all of us. But how quickly can you get out? And one of the quickest state changers that's going over on the lesson last night is physical movement. Just move, start moving and rob some of these emotions that are coming out of the parietal lobe and all that. Same center that's used for movement. Start moving and you feel better. And all of a sudden it's like, man, everything's a little bit better. And then again, you make better choices.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the brain scans, the functional near infrared spectroscopy, where they check someone at baseline, they have them go on a 20 to 30-minute walk, they wait about 10 to 20 minutes, and they retest them. Significantly increased metabolic activity in the brain. It's like a low battery versus
Yeah,
a charged battery.
that's awesome. I think exercise, I always tell people, it's the greatest drug in the world. Like I believe, I'm doing the 75 hard now. I did last year too. That's a little extreme, but I'm a big believer that every day we should do something. Now it could just be a walk, but do something. Like our body is meant to move, right? And it's almost like it's so obvious, but today's day and age with screens and all this stuff, most people just stay glued to a chair and they're not moving. I'm like, start with walking. Just start with something simple,
I
right?
remember I told a patient one time, I need you to start walking. She goes, Dr. Tim, you can't just tell me to start walking. You got to give me an exact distance. I said, well, right now, let me ask you this. How much are you walking per day? Well, I'm not. Okay, then yes, I can tell you to get behind outside and start walking. I mean,
Yeah,
any motion's better than nothing. Our lymphatic system requires it. So you're not going to be able to detoxify if you're not moving. I
yeah,
mean, you can take all the supplements in the world, but if you're not moving, you're not going to move your lymphatic fluid. And that's like our garbage disposal system.
yeah.
And so, what are some of the common or the most common myths you see today that are still around that you wish would go away in the health, wellness, and fitness space?
So one of the big ones is that simultaneous model weight loss: burn calories, cut calories, lose weight. Again, there's a real world. Does that last for people? The answer is no. So I wish that people in the fitness space would, because they're teaching people this. And then what happens is people start to lose trust in the system. right? They start saying, well, man, maybe this diet's going to be the one. Or if I just burn more here, I'm like, are you concerned with how much muscle you put on in a workout? No, it doesn't happen in the workout. Don't
Right.
be concerned with how many calories you're burning in the workout. And then that's another one too. What I've seen, so even when I started fasting, right? So 2019, Devin has a picture of me, and that was doing your 2 meals a day, right? And I look at it, I was still kind of tracking, still in a deficit if you went off based off the caloric equations and all that. And now, if you look at the caloric equations, I'm in a big surplus. I have a voracious appetite. When I feast tonight, my average feast would be 4,000 to 4,500 calories.
Wow.
And I'm leaner and more muscular. So I'm
Do
like,
you feel bloated when you feast?
no, so I might get distended in my stomach, but I don't feel blow. My digestion's so on point. And that's one of the things I teach people is look, when you first start feasting, there's a learning curve. If you eat to the point where you're not comfortable, it'll go away. Go for a walk or something afterwards. But you might say, oh, that's not that comfortable. Maybe I overdid it, right? But yeah, I'm pretty good with my belly will get distended while it's digesting. So I'm putting a lot of food in. But next morning I wake up, I'm lean, I feel tight. And that's one of the big things I focus on people too. I'm like, digestion, right? If your digestion's on point, that's telling us a lot. Like you're probably on the healthier side. If you're constipated and you're just a mess, let's try to fix that and give the gut a break. Right. So now, like you said, the immune system, neurotransmitters, all the stuff in the gut is so important. But yeah, the calorie equation is something I'm going to be banging the drum on hard coming up. It's because again, I don't see it bear out in the real world. I think people I was a slave to my food. Like, and it was so liberating when I came on to the long form fasting. So I'm like, you know what? I can enjoy my food. I don't have to track anything. I eat to my appetite. So I eat, and again, I've got a huge appetite, but I eat until I'm full. And then boom. And every meal I eat now, I feel such gratitude towards. I pray before every meal. That fasting got me into that. And I'm like, man, every meal is the best meal I ever ate. That's what I feel like. And I'm like, this is the way it should be, not just mindless eating.
Absolutely. Let's talk about EPOC, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, because I hear the same thing. Still, I left outpatient orthopedic rehab 12 years ago, 11 years ago, and people were talking about, oh yeah, I burned 172 calories on the treadmill. And I'm like, muscle is your best metabolic currency. Focus on building muscle. Oh, my heart. Oh, I can't believe you're eating that protein bar. It has fat in it. What do you think your cell membranes are made out of? I was talking about this with Devin earlier. 30% of your cell membranes are made of cholesterol.
Yeah.
God doesn't make mistakes. If it
No.
were bad, why would even something like insulin resistance? It's trying to prevent all the blood sugar flooding your cell. So it's trying to protect it. It's trying to keep you alive.
Yeah.
So what can we do to optimize EPOC?
Epoch. So the way I like to train, so Scott Abel really turned me on. Scott was the first coach I ever hired. He's another brilliant mind in that field, mind, body, and spirit. And he would really teach that. Look, we want peripheral heart action, right? Head to toe. And a lot of people will make that mistake with their junk cardio and all that. I got to train my heart. I'm like, do you guys not realize the muscular system drives the cardiovascular system? Right. So the more muscle we work head to toe, get the oxygen debt. And I tell people, I'm like, once we keep building you up, if you could have a conversation, you should be going again. Do your next set. The days of let me do chest, sit around and talk for 5 minutes. I'm like, what are you doing? You're not doing anything. And in most cases, right? So I want to have that oxygen debt, man. And that's going to give you that metabolic boost for 24, 48 hours, right? Afterwards, and you're just going to be humming. Now, if you keep stacking that day after day, you're getting more insulin, that's going to help with insulin sensitivity. Put yourself in a fasted state. Like that's part of what I teach with the Panda method is fast, beast, and feast.
Absolutely. Well said. So I read in your bio that you're doing, and this surprised me. I didn't know this, but you are doing longer runs now.
Yeah.
You training for, is it a marathon or half
Yeah.
marathon?
Yeah. I got a marathon coming up. What is it? It's about 3.5 weeks now.
So
Yeah.
how do you prevent the spikes in cortisol?
You
And
know, yeah, it's a good question. I try to make sure I'm recovering. I do stuff as far as I don't know if it helps with the cortisol. I do it more for mental toughness. I do my cold plunge every day. Um, but I go based on how I feel. My joints are good. Like, and I've had two horrific knee injuries. People will say, "Man, how do you, and my knees feel fine." So I do know, like last week was my longest run. I went out 16 miles, and that freaking zapped me. I feel like I was in like a probably for about 2 hours afterwards, almost like a mild state of shock. Like and I had my shirt off because it was warm, and then the sun started going down, and I got this chill. I can my almost like Raynaud's in my one finger. My finger was white, and I was able to come out of it like 2-3 hours afterwards. And next day I'll walk. So if I feel like I'm really banged up, and I always tell people walking will lower your stress hormones. Just go for a nice peaceful walk. So that's probably my go-to is just walking. Sometimes I do backwards walking. And then once I feel like I'm ready. So that was Wednesday PM last week. Friday mornings is the toughest workout of the week that I do it. So 36 hours later, I was smashing it again. Now, if you look at me from like a readiness point of view, I don't know if I was ready or not, but I did it, and my recovery's on point. Like I always feel like I'm recovered. So that's kind of how I base it. I get good quality sleep. I would like to get actually more sleep, but I feel like I could perform. My energy's on point. So I base it on that, but I'm not doing anything necessarily specific besides what I feel is keeping the inflammation lower through all the fasting.
Yeah, I mean, the cold thermogenesis, cold plunging, that definitely helps with mitochondrial biogenesis, activating the brown fat, improving immune function. It's going to keep your pathogen load down. And so I'm guessing well, I'm not
Sure.
guessing, that has to play a major role because if you think about it, 3,000 calories of M&Ms is going to elicit a very different hormonal response than a steak and broccoli.
Yeah, big time.
But yet people are so hung up on, oh, this has too many calories. Yeah, I mean, if you're sitting on the couch all day, then yeah, anything you eat is going to make you gain weight. But as long as you're reasonably active, you know, I think that it becomes sort of a moot point. And one thing I noticed, in patients and clients is I've had several fitness competitors, and they would go from bulking to shedding, and then they would get Wilson's temperature syndrome or subclinical hypothyroidism. And so, can you touch on that and how going back and forth like that can damage your metabolism?
Yeah, I experienced that myself, man, because that was the traditional line of thought. Okay, it's the off season, let's put on weight. Now, when I actually looked at it, if I came in even 3, 4, 5 pounds of muscle, which is a lot of muscle on a lean physique, that would be a big gain. But did I need to gain 40 pounds to do that? Probably not. And my metabolic rate was destroyed after all these years of competing. Like I said, I would be eating, if you went off the equation, in a big deficit. And I would not have the leanness, but the body composition that you would expect. And it was so many years, but the fasting definitely helped me course correct that, kind of giving the body a break. But I don't think it's that when I see these guys, one of the groups I was in, these guys were all, I got a bulk, it's bulking phase now. I'm like, this is such an outdated way to think. Yeah,
Mhm.
if you're an extreme outlier and you're an IFBB pro, but even then, I look at guys like Lee Haney, and you look at some of the old timers, they weren't ballooning up like 50, 60, 70 pounds. They were
Right.
staying within striking distance. They were one of my buddies, Tim Martin, IFBB pro, actually competed. He was natural. He claims he's natural. And now Tim's now 55, and this dude is always in shape. Maybe put on 10 pounds, 15 pounds, but he's always in shape. And I'm like, and he was awesome competitor, right? So I think there's a lot I think that's such an outdated way to think, and I think it's like a lazy approach. So let me just eat whatever I want and just put on size.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think her name is Gina Aliotti, the figure competitor through Testosterone Nation back in like 2010. And she came out and said, I don't really believe in this bulking, cycling from bulking to shredding. And so, she would stay within that 10 to 15 pounds.
Yeah.
One anecdotal story I have is when I was practicing in North Carolina, I had a female figure competitor come in. Nothing had changed in her workouts or her nutrition, but within about maybe 2.5 weeks, she'd gained a little over 14 pounds. So, long story short, we did some detective work. Even though her house was only 2 years old, she had a leak in the roof and she didn't detoxify mold well. So, the studies have shown that when you take a fat cell, you expose it to these inflammatory cytokines from the immune system, they double in size.
Wow.
And so that's why she was bloated. It was a big part of her self confidence gone. I said, listen, I trust you. I know you're doing everything you're supposed to, but you got to live with the friend while we remediate this. And then sure enough, the weight, fell off.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
the type of stuff people need to hear, right? Because again, they'll go back to these math equations, and it's like it hasn't worked for you. It hasn't
yeah.
worked for it doesn't.
And let's talk about, because I see some heavily geared up Instagram influencers talking about when you eat does not matter, which might be the silliest thing I've ever heard. I know if I eat just an hour after, there's a saying, I'm paraphrasing, but in Ayurvedic medicine, every hour you eat after the sun goes down takes an hour off of your life.
Yeah.
Can you touch on the importance of timing in eating?
Yeah. So the big thing I focus on with the Panda Diet is if we look at, one of the things Poliquin taught in the first BioSig with me was the fishing effect, right? And cortisol wants to rise. It's the alertness hormone, should wake you up naturally, let it rise. But as soon as we eat, if we're eating a typical breakfast, insulin's going to go up, cortisol is going to come back down. This is the kind of the concept behind recovery shakes and all this. And for most people, you're pretty much signaling your body to not burn fat, right? So that's one of the big things I focus on. I tell people physiologically from my studies is the best time of the day would be lunchtime ish, in that range to eat. But I look at it a habit formation. So to what I look at with people, because the base program I have people on is like a 1 meal a day. I'm like, okay, if you can't eat in a relaxed state, you shouldn't be eating. If you're eating while you're stressed and you're doing work and you're driving, skip the meal. So for most people, dinner is the ideal time because their day is essentially for the most part over. They can eat in a relaxed state, and they're starting to wind down. So they're going to be in that parasympathetic nervous system. And you want to eat when you're more insulin sensitive. So if like I train, my first training when I'm on my regular routine is usually almost always early morning. And I'm not eating until 6, 7 o'clock. And so that's the type of protocol I like to use. But again, physiologically, it would probably be lunch. But for most people, that's not going to work if they've got social functions or family dinners or whatnot.
Right.
So I always look at the habits. When can they form a habit around it?
Speaking of social functions, one question I've had, and I've had different recommendations over the years in terms of, oh, let's say you're going to a dinner party or a cookout at someone's house. Do you eat, a protein bar and some mixed nuts before you go? So you only need to eat a little bit of food, but you don't want to be rude. How do you recommend your clients
Yeah,
navigate that?
this is great because when you're at your home base and you're not going out to a social function, then you try to stick with your more nutritious stuff that you have more control over. I tell people with the fasting, you do have more leeway with what you eat. So if you got a party you're going to and you want to have your burgers and whatever they got there, just make that your feast. So
Mhm.
fast up till then, go enjoy it, right? And because if you're detracting from stuff, and I did this for so long in life that you might find pleasurable, you're gonna resent it, and eventually you're gonna break from it. So go to the social function. You're not doing it every night. Enjoy yourself. Boom, hop back on your plan. So yeah, I don't think I mean I used to do stuff like that. Let me eat my food, my Tupperware food, blah, blah, before I go. But I was in a prison, man. I was in a prison when I was doing that.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what Tony Robbins says: push never works in the long term. It'll work for a while, but pull, love, operating from a place of love and happiness, that always works and
That's
it's
great.
sustainable.
Yeah, that's awesome.
What besides all the fasting stuff we've talked about, what's something health related that you know now you wish you would have known 10 years ago?
Health related now. I mean, the fasting is a big piece of it. I would say the sodium was a big piece. That was really since I came out to the long form fasting. Um, I don't know if you saw my bio, and it's been working for me, I feel like, but I got into urine therapy about a year ago, researching that, and I heard a doctor speak about it, about the clotting, anti-clotting mechanisms. It was talking about the shot, right, that people got. And I know you and I chatted about that. We did not do that. But I started looking into it after I heard that. I'm like, whoa, if it can do that, let me look into the medicinal benefits. So I got 3 books on it, did a lot of research. And it's one of those things people hear and they're like, oh, man. And I'm like, listen, Eastern medicine's been doing this for a long time. This was part of practice for a long time. There's compounds in there, you know. So I think that, would have been a interesting thing. When I was a teacher, I would get sick often. I was a phys ed teacher, being around these kids. It's rare now that I get sick, very rare. Now I think it's a combination of stuff like that, the cold therapy, the fasting. But it's like I could be in a room full of, I feel like deathly ill people, and it won't affect me.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I don't know if you use the sauna
Yeah,
much at
yeah,
all.
yeah. I
Yeah,
don't as much as Devin, but I'm in there about once or twice a week.
yeah, I mean that, modulates the autonomic nervous system, increases parasympathetic tone. And if you think about it, so I have a full spectrum portable Therasage sauna, but the far infrared waves penetrate a certain depth, but the near infrared waves penetrate the deepest. So, if you look at on some of the movies, I used to, as a kid and teenager, watch movies and you see people in Greece or Italy, huge bellies wearing Speedo, but they have access to a sauna and it's a common social gathering. It might just be a regular steam sauna, but they're increasing their core body temperature. And the two ways you change the function of a protein is you heat it up or you change the pH. And so when you alter the temperature by increasing your core metabolic rate, basal metabolic rate in the sauna, and then you have some cold thermogenesis, so contrast therapy, then the growth hormone and anabolic hormone effects are even more, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, certainly, man. And I think it's a great therapy to get into. I think it's awesome. Um, we got ours out in the garage. We got it about 6 months ago. But yeah, I
Uh-huh.
love all that stuff. One of my brothers actually just opened up. It's called Sauna Suites, and they have the cold plunges, and they've got the infrared saunas. So, I was in there last weekend going back and forth. The contrast therapy. But I think all this stuff's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started practicing, I still use supplements, obviously, but I tell people it used to be that you had to spend 8, maybe 10,000 to get a good sauna. Now mine is therapeutic, clinical grade. I pay like $1,200 with my professional
Yeah,
discount.
yeah,
Yeah, that, a red light therapy device, cold plunge tub. You have yourself 2 to 3 good biohacking devices that are going to last you 15, 20 years. Your whole family has access to them. That's better than the best supplement that you have to buy month after month
yeah,
after month. Now,
certainly.
there's some supplements, like magnesium, zinc. I mean, the soil's depleted. So unless you're importing your food from another planet, you're not going to
Yes,
get enough.
correct.
But yeah, I'm really impressed with what you're doing. I like that you don't, tell people to just keep eating more, keep putting more weight on the bar. Like, there's science
Yeah,
and a methodology behind it. It's not just, counting reps, using machines, which I mean, we could have a whole podcast about this, but when you use machines, it gives you, in my experience, a false sense of security
yeah,
because you're creating strength and mobility minus stability. So if you go from a Smith machine incline bench press to a free bar incline bench press, you won't be able to do but maybe 50 to 60% of the weight
yeah, yeah.
safely.
Oh yeah, yeah. You gotta. One of the first books, or actually the first book I ever got, I think on strength training was Big Beyond Belief, Leo Costa and Tom Platz. When I was in high school, and I remember them. They kind of ranked exercises, but anything where you're actually moving through space had a much higher neural activation. That always stuck with me. So if you come to our gyms, we have a lat pull down for pulling, but other than that, you're pushing sleds, you're carrying stuff, you're single legged, you're doing all this type of stuff, right? You're not on a machine. We don't even have them in the gym because of that reason.
Absolutely. And myth. I mean, I was even taught this in school. Oh yeah, if you're working with the elderly population, definitely use machines. They're safer. I'm like, no, because then they're going to go home and they're going to need to squat down or hip hinge down to pick something up, and they're going to have strength and mobility without stability. They're going to fall.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with sarcopenia, we need to work those type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers. So, the pink dumbbell sideline external rotation stuff, I mean, crap's got to go.
Oh yeah, certainly.
Well, I appreciate your time, Kyle. I know you're extremely busy, your wealth of knowledge, and thanks for the work that you're doing. Hopefully we can have you back on in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Tim. I got to get you on my show next, man.
Absolutely. Sounds good, buddy.
All
Have a
right.
great rest of your day. God
You
bless.
too, Tim. Be in touch.